Good morning. Okay, Liz, we have a lot to cover, so let's get started. My name is Paul Milham. I work for WildWorks. Okay, we make video games, mostly this one here, Animal Jam. So what is Animal Jam? It's basically what you see here. Okay, a lot of this is user-made content, which is really cool. But kids dress up animals, dance around, talk to each other, do fun stuff. I would like to thank Animal Jam for sponsoring me on the trip. And you have a beautiful country here, beautiful city. Thank you for inviting me. So I just want to cover what we're going to, or just briefly outline what we're going to cover today. So we're going to talk about attacks. So why is data validation important? Okay, I'm going to try to convince you that the world is in fact a scary place. Okay, and how data validation leads to security. And then we're going to talk about data normalization. Some people call this conversion, and how that leads to stability in your code base. We'll talk about Joi and Tean. Those are two validation libraries. And then we'll talk about how we integrate it into popular frameworks, Express and Hapi. Okay, we'll do questions at the end if we have time. And be thinking about it. I got some toys for you. Totally unreleased in Europe toys. Okay? Animal Jam stuff. It's pretty good. Actually, you probably don't care, but they're here. Okay? So what do I do at WildWorks? I keep kids safe, basically. Okay? So let's talk about how do we keep our applications safe. Okay, so first, safe from what? Okay, you like to think the web is full of rainbows and dancing kids and stuff. Well, I don't know what you like to think, but the reality is there are a lot of people on the web that just want to watch the world burn, right? Okay, if you want to see some of the attacks out there, visit this link. It's really good bedtime reading. Give you nightmares. Okay, that's some quality stuff though. So let's cover a few of the common attacks. Everyone's probably familiar with this, SQL injection. Okay, so let's just say we're running our application code. Somebody passes in a name and an email because we want to create a user. The name is Paul. That's a great name. Okay, but their email happens to be right parenthesis, semicolon, drop table. Okay. You get the idea. So instead of now, if this code is in your code base, you have other problems, right? Like somebody's not doing their job at this point as well. You should never just be interpolating a string and sending it off to your database. But if it was there, data validation could prevent this, okay? So that's an example of SQL injection. Something very similar is shell injection. Let's just say you create a child process or something, and you, in our case, we wanted to pass some data to PHP. Now, whenever you're passing a string to any other program, you're kind of asking for trouble. Okay, so this is just another example. Here, we just want to encrypt a password, but the password happens to be rimraf. Okay, now there has to be other problems for this attack to succeed, and this is just a jerk attack, right? I mean, like, nobody's stealing your data. They're just screwing with you. And it's not always that way. Probably worse is when they're stealing your data and they get away with it. But anyway, if the user had the right privileges, this could wipe out everything on your computer. And then, you're in trouble. Another attack that a lot of people don't know about is RDOS. So you have regexes all over in your programs. And regexes are awesome. But they can be kind of dangerous. You have to be really careful about them. And there's a whole category of attacks called evil regexes. This is kind of a whole topic on its own. But basically what it is you have a benign looking regex. In this case, it's just looking for trailing semicolons. Okay? And you can see that on the third line there. It's just looking for trailing semicolons. And that's not a big deal, right? It seems like a totally normal thing to do. But what if someone contacts your app and they pass in a string with 65,535 semicolons, okay? Suddenly, this regex locks up your event loop. Nothing happens on your machine. In this case, I ran it, and it was almost 6 seconds it locked up my application. And this isn't hypothetical. This is a real vulnerability I pulled out of a module called Tough Cookie, okay? I think it was Tough Cookie. Anyway, I actually got that from SNCC. I think some SNCC guys are here. That's actually a really cool module. Help you find vulnerabilities in node modules. Go. Oh yeah, there we go. So, sample vulnerability. Okay, so basically, hopefully I've convinced you that bad stuff can happen, right? And security is important. And those are just the 3 sample attacks, okay? This is a huge topic, and there's a lot more that can go bad, okay? But a lot of this is preventable if you just know what the heck is going into your program, okay? Okay, like you don't just pick up food without looking at it and eat it, okay? Don't shove crap into your program that you don't know what it is. Okay, so validation is verifying the shape of our data. So basically, malicious data can't get in. Okay, that's the goal. And validation is really your first line of defense. As far as your application goes, there's a lot that your infrastructure team should be doing as well. But when it comes to you controlling the code, this is what you can do first. Okay, so let's talk about Joi. So this is just a sample of how to validate in Joi. It's a really cool module. I would advise you to check it out. So let's just say we're expecting a string. In this case, seriously a string. That seemed funnier when I wrote it. But so we want to make sure that this is a string. And so what we want to do is Joi just validates it. We tell it we're validating a string. And we give it a callback, error value. So pretty standard stuff there. Okay, it's going to tell you there's no error. And the value it passes back is the validated converted value. That's really important. Okay? So if we want to have a failure, let's say we ask for a username or something, and you got the number 5, okay? It's actually a number data type. And that's not a string, right? So we're going to get an error. The other thing Joi can do is you can build schemas out of it. So it's not simple. Like, you're not going to have to write like 50 lines, you know, of validate this integer, validate this integer, validate this string. You can build these schemas, okay? So here's one for username, password, okay? So my username needs to be, on this line 2 here, it needs to be a string, but it's not just a string, it's an email. And it's not just an email, it needs to be a WildWorks email, okay? So I'm expecting someone from WildWorks to log into this application, okay? And then we have a password too, and you can see that I'm limiting the length on here too, okay? So nobody can pass me 65,000 semicolons as the password, okay? Now when we validate it, let's just say that the data I got, my username is Paul Milham at WildWorks, so that's great, that passes, okay? And the password is Justin Bieber, okay? And that's great too, okay? Oh man, the jokes are not going over. Okay, that's okay. So let's just say that's what happened, okay? And that's good. Everything will pass, your program's not mad, it doesn't understand who Justin Bieber is. If it did, it probably wouldn't pass, but so let's go ahead and let's say we have another schema, okay? And the point I want to make is that Joi validation is all in, okay? You can't validate half of it, you have to validate all of it or none of it, okay? So now I have a schema for a username, but the data I get is still the same, okay? So we're only validating username, but we still get passed in a username and a password, okay? So we're going to get an error, and it's going to tell us Justin Bieber is not allowed. Amazing. Okay. So oops, let's go back. So validating one field means validating them all. And this way, people can't forget. Okay, someone comes along later and adds another parameter to the endpoint. They have to validate it, or it's going to throw an error. And that's a very, very good thing. Okay, it's a very good thing for maintenance, bug fixes. Okay, so let's talk about normalization. So this is basically being a good citizen. Let's say you want a number. You're asking for a user ID, something like that. Now, if someone passes you a string with 5 in it, right, you don't want to be a jerk and say, get out of here. That's not a number, right? Somebody's going to get mad at you. And so what you can do is you can just automatically convert that. And it's important that you do, okay? I mean, it's nice to not be a jerk, but you also need stable code, okay? So we want to create a contract with the consumer, whether that's another web app, a microservice, a client web application, whatever it is. We're creating a contract that says I'm expecting these things, I know I'm going to get these things, or it's not going to make it into my application code. Okay, and normalization isn't just casting strings to integers. Okay, that's cool, but it gets a lot more complex than that, and that's good. Okay, so let's look at an example. So here we have Joi validating, and you can see we got a string, okay? We're asking for a number, we got a string, okay? And in my application code, I'm calling to fixed on it. Now, if I didn't validate this, I would get a type error, right? Because string doesn't have to fixed. And that doesn't seem like a big deal right here, but let's say you're in the middle of some application code. Suddenly your application hits this, throws an error, you're in an unknown state. What do? You probably just kill the worker, okay? Restart things. And that's a good bit of advice. Don't keep running your application in an unknown state. That's bad news, okay? But you see, oh, hold on. So you can see that the value that's actually passed back from Joi is 1.9. So it went ahead and converted it from this string into a number because that's what we asked it for. Okay, so it goes ahead and converts types for you. Okay, and it also do defaults. So let's say we want a number there, and somebody doesn't pass it in a JSON payload, something like that. It'll go ahead and it'll stick it in there for us. Okay, so you don't have to have all these stupid undefined checks everywhere. Okay, it's the most annoying thing when you're like, you get null errors, undefined errors, and your code base is littered by if nulls or if undefined. Okay, so you don't have to do that if you're sticking in defaults, which is really cool. So it allows you to make safe assumptions in your code base, which is always a good thing. When you can make safe assumptions that people can depend on, you're going to have more code stability, and there's going to be less clutter around your code. So this is a good place to talk about Tean. So Tean, well, here, I'll open up all these bullet points real quick so you can kind of see what it is. So this is the library we wrote at WildWorks, and I'm not trying to sell you on it. Like, it's not, hey, come use our module. But it does have some really valuable high-level ideas that I think you should look into. Okay? So one, Joi is kind of verbose, which is annoying. And this is just a declarative syntax. And what I mean by that is you could convert it into JSON back and forth. That would be fine. Okay? So asynchronous, you can convert data into models. That's where we're going to hit on normalization really hard, that's a really, really powerful feature. Okay, it's strict by default. And one rule I try to live by is no validation, no data. Okay? If you don't validate that garbage, you don't get it in the application. I don't care if you're developing, whatever. You're not going to see the data if you do not validate it. Okay? That's really important for the development workflow. So if another developer is working on your code and he forgets the validation part, he's not going to see it in there. He's not going to be able to develop. Okay, so that makes sure your data validation is in place. Okay, and just a note, custom validators were recently added to Joi, which is really cool too. They're implemented a little bit differently, but okay. So we'll run through some quick validation. So it's really similar to Joi in that you pass it a schema, pass it some data, and then it'll tell you, is it valid? It was an error in Joi, but is it valid? And then the result, okay? So this is Animal Jam. So we talk about animals a lot. So we're expecting an animal that's a string. Someone passes us kangaroo. Yay, kangaroo. Okay. So, but let's say we want an animal. It's a string. Someone passes null. No, that's not okay. Okay, I asked you for an animal, not a null pointer, okay? So that's not okay. Okay, Tean's a little opinionated. I guess maybe you could argue null's a string. I don't know. But and let's look at a schema here. So here, we're asking for an animal up at this top line. So it's a string, but the only thing I want in this endpoint is kangaroos and tigers, okay? So it's a string, but it's a specific type of string. And furthermore, it has a default value, okay? So if you don't tell me what kind of animal you're looking at, it's going to be a tiger, okay? This actually is a hypothetical endpoint. I don't have a program that accepts kangaroos and tigers. But it's not that far-fetched either, okay? And do you want your animal to sparkle, okay? Because again, this is Animal Jam, and sparkling animals are really important, okay? So yeah, of course you do. It's a default Boolean true, okay? So let's just say that someone passed in a tiger, so that's great. In our validated result, we're going to get an object, so this result is safe data. Whatever shows up in here, just like Joi, is safe data to use, okay? It's not the raw data object. It doesn't mutate your original data source or anything like that. You're going to get a safe object to use that you can do whatever you want with and you can make safe assumptions about. So we're going to go ahead and get that object, and you can see here that it's an animal. It has two fields, animal, tiger, and sparkles true. Okay? That's pretty cool. So if you want to map onto models, which is also really, really powerful, you can do that. And that's one of the kind of the power features. So let's say we need an accessory. So that would be like a skirt, a bracelet, or, my job's kind of fun because no matter how stressful it gets, I always just have to remember at the end of the day, I'm selling virtual tiger hats. you know. So that always kind of helps take the pressure off. But an avatar accessory. So that's avatar accessory is not a valid JSON. I mean JavaScript type, right? Like you're not going to do type of on anything and get avatar accessory back. Okay. Same with this user UID. But what these are is these are models that exist within my program. And so this is really cool because let's say someone, I have an, this is an endpoint, let's say to send a gift to someone. So we want to send a gift to a player in Animal Jam. So I want to know which users, that's why these brackets are on here. So it's an array of users. So tell me which users and what you want to send them. Now when you send me the accessory, I know that it's an avatar accessory. And so I can do a lookup on the database and make sure it's a valid avatar accessory. However you decided to identify it, could be by a unique string or by an ID, a database ID. But I can do a lookup on it and make sure that it's valid. So now in my application code, I can assume that you have given me, I can safely assume you have given me a valid accessory ID, which is really cool, you know, because it's not just an integer. I know that this is an integer that corresponds to a key in my database, okay? And the same with the users. And you know, there are a few different ways to identify users. You might pass me a name, you might pass me an email, you might pass me a database ID. We're actually in an unfortunate situation where we can uniquely identify users in so many different ways. But anyway, you go ahead and you pass it to me. It's going to normalize it, convert it into a model, and then pass it to my application code. Okay, so the things that it does is it provides a friendly API, right? So there are multiple ways to identify things, and it's okay for people to call my application and identify them that way. I know that I'm going to get back a model in my application, okay? And I know what properties it has. I know everything about it, okay? So it's going to provide consistency, reliability, and it's going to eliminate a lot of stupid bugs, okay? Lots and lots and lots of stupid bugs because you're expecting one type, they happen to pass in an alias of that type, okay? So let's talk about Express, okay? So everybody uses it, no built-in validation. This third one really has no point. I'm sorry about that. Okay, and everybody knows about Express. It's by far the most popular framework out there, right? So that's a great situation to be in. You have something everyone uses, and it doesn't come with data validation built in. Okay, so let's look at how you would stick Joi in here. Now this is just plain Joi I'm going to stick in here. So we have a route, and it accepts the username, okay? So what we're doing here is just a regular route, right? And oh, you've seen all this before. You saw it in the other stuff. So you're just hitting a route. You send it through your validate, okay? And then we're going to override our params with it. Okay, if we're doing the same thing with Tean, very similar, okay? Just when we get our request, we pipe it through Tean, and then we actually use the data in the callback because that's the safe data, okay? So we get the result, and we override our parameters. And this is fine, okay, but we have a problem. So the problem here is we're relying on the developer to remember to put in the validation, okay? We don't want to do that, okay? Because someone will forget, okay? Someone will forget, and someone will forget in the code review, too, okay? So let's look at how middleware can help us solve this problem, because middleware is really powerful and it's awesome. Okay? So what we do is Express allows you to add middleware, well, it's like middleware, onto your individual routes. So on your individual route, you're going to add your data validation. Tean has just a helper that'll return a function that you can use as this middleware piece. Okay? So you can see I have these options things everywhere. So basically what we do is we have a kind of like a config file, okay, and that has all these properties in it, and then we'll just loop over all the configs and add them. Now you might be like, wow, your Express app is starting to look a lot like Hapi, and it is, okay. I'm a big fan of Hapi. But the point is you want to have some mechanism where the developer cannot forget to add this. Okay, because as soon as you add a system where it's opt-in and they don't really have to remember, you're in trouble. Here, we got to speed up. Okay, so Celebrate is a middleware for Joi. I mean, a middleware for Express that uses Joi. Okay, it's good. Just take a look. Okay, Hapi. Lots of good stuff about Hapi. I like Hapi. You should check it out. Okay, it has a lot of stuff built in, validation being one of those things. So let's look at how that works. So basically, it's more declarative than express is. Okay, so you just kind of have a config and tell it what to do. And validate is one of those. Now, as long as you remember to get this validate on there, you're good to go. Okay, you can forget it, but if it's there at all, it's all in and it'll work. Okay, so a couple of takeaways. Force validation. Okay, you want to make sure your data is reliable, acceptable, and it's exactly what you want. As soon as you forget to do that, somebody is going to pass you something you're not expecting, and your app's going to crash. Okay, the rule I live by is no validation, no data. If you take away anything from this talk, I hope it's that. Okay, you don't validate the data, you don't get it. Okay. Okay. This slide kind of says the same thing, but in different ways. But yeah, just make sure you're validating your data. Okay, so this is kind of just an aside. Have you thought about data validation on the way out? Yeah, people might be shoving bad stuff in, but you don't want to send stuff out you're not expecting either. Okay, now there's, okay, so you want to validate your stuff on the way out. I call it heartbleed. It's not, this isn't technically heartbleed, that was something else. But let's say you have an uninitialized buffer and someone figured that out and they're getting to return that data. If you're validating your data on the way out, you'd probably see it's not matching a shape that you're expecting and refuse to return it. Hapi also supports this, which is really cool. Or somebody does some injection attack and they figure out how to dump all your users. Okay, if that's not the validated data you're expected to return, you can simply deny that. Okay, so validation can be a very important second security layer on the back end as well. Okay, so we're not going to have time for any questions, but if you have anything individually you'd like to ask me, and if you'd like one of these sweet toys, then come talk to me afterwards. You can see where to get the slides. I've got them posted. I also have an interactive animation of cats. If you didn't like the talk, I don't know. That's pretty good too. But yeah, that's it. Validate your data.